Well, joining me today is Professor Theo Venter from the University of the Northwest in South Africa, and we're going to discuss the response of the ANC, particularly the ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula, at a news conference following a meeting of the party's National Executive Committee. Professor Theo, welcome to the studio, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Mbalula's statements. He had strong words for the ANC's Government of National Unity partner, the Democratic Alliance, and he also directed a message to the United States regarding the tariffs imposed on South Africa by the Trump administration. Well, let's remind ourselves what he said.
But the ANC affirms that the GNU is a correct tactical intervention for the country for reasons of stabilizing politically and economically this country. The DA political mischief we see from time to time in the GNU, it's a matter that we need to address. And we have made an example here about the issue of the tariffs. You must understand that the tariffs imposed by the United States of America are negatively going to affect our economy. And you can't, for national interest, say no and do BE and all of that in order to appease the United States of America, because among others, this is what the US want from us, that we must do away with certain policies, which for us, in terms of transformation, it's not going to be possible. So it's to basically coerce us to do things that are anti-transformation. It's not possible. If it means we're going to suffer through sanctions as leaders of the ANC, let it be. We'll never beg imperialists to subvert our democracy, to subvert our sovereignty. It happened during the period of struggle. It will happen even now. We will never forsake our country, which we fought for its liberation. And we're still marching on even now. Not this ANC, not this leadership. If they want to bring sanctions on us, let them bring them. But this country, South Africa, all its citizens know that it is a democratic country, it's a liberated country, and we are still transforming this country in order to achieve equity. And we will still pursue redress because we are not equal in this economy. This economy is still male, white dominated. And you want to tell us to abandon policies that seek to advance transformation. We're told by somebody who's more wealthy than all of countries combined in the world that I'll give you Starlink, but you must not do black economic empowerment. In our country, we must agree to that. It's not possible to agree to that. You are asking us to abandon what we stand for. You are asking the ANC, this African National Congress, to stop struggling and then close shop and become something. We are not DA. DA has to agree with that because they don't want affirmative action. Leave black economic empowerment. They don't want affirmative action. They don't want redress. They don't believe in transformation. Now they are talking about black economic empowerment, which we reviewed and said that is triple BEE. And then we broaden it to be broad-based and all of that. And then their anti-transformation is a party of anti-transformation. So if you ask us all of these things that the Trump administration is asking us to do, they are asking us to abandon the very essence of who we are, which is not going to be possible.
Yes, the NEC, like you've explained, had a meeting, an extended meeting over the weekend in the eastern part of Gauteng. And the major topics they had to discuss were the state of the Government of National Unity, of course, Trump tariffs on South Africa, and then something of an internal battle among themselves and the SACP. And now that meeting already ended on Monday when the president gave his closing remarks in the form of a speech that we've heard many times over. And it took them 2 days to set up this press conference, which took place today. And those issues definitely reflected in the formal presentation by Fikile Mbalula. But on a question from journalists afterwards, 2 or 3 things irritated him. It's clear that the relationship with the SACP, which we must discuss further, irritated him in terms of where they're going and what they're doing. And we can talk a little bit about the implications for the ANC. The second thing that irritated him, of course, is the role of the PLA in the government of national unity and all these announcements that the ANC would like to expand the membership of the government of national unity. And that sounded like they want to invite other parties into the government of national unity. I said it sounded like that. It is not the case. I think it's going to look differently. And then lastly, the whole issue of Trump. And when he started with his Trump bashing on a question about tariffs and so on and so on, and I was taken back a lot of years ago when Jimmy Carter, he was president, and the South African leader was John Foster. And it was the 1977 election. And at that stage, Carter was on the forefront of instituting sanctions against South Africa about apartheid. And what President Foster did was not to look internally and asking whether what the National Party was doing was moral or not. No, what they did, they went on to Carter bashing. They actually won an election against Carter in South Africa against the opposition when Carter wasn't even involved in that election. And that seems to be the ANC is very much on the same boat with Trump this time, and taking him to task for many things except to do some introspection. In other words, what is it that we can do to facilitate a better trade relation? That would be, in my view, to deal with the merits of the workplace. It is clear that Trump tariffs is a political tool. He uses it against us. He's currently using it against India. He's using it against Brazil. He's even using it against Switzerland, of all countries. But it is a political tool to get some or other economic advantage. Now, if you then want to stiffen your back, or you want to be a little forward-coming, trying to challenge the case, I don't think that is what a small economy with less than 1% of the global GDP can do against a big economy that represents roughly 1/5 of global trade and global economics. So it's I think it's a little tantrum which South Africans would understand, but that's how far it would go.
Well, it almost reminded me of Botha way back in the apartheid era when he told the United Nations, do your damnest. So he was actually saying, yeah, if you want to, institute sanctions, just go and do it almost. That's what Fikile Mbalula almost implied.
Well, Botha was a master in selling the unsellable and defending the undefendable or undefensible. And he reminds me against very much of the public relations and the international relations of the Israelis nowadays vis-a-vis Gaza. If you just look at the pictures, at the optics of what's going on there, it seems undefensible. And it seems like you must do something, even if it's just morally so. But it seems to me Netanyahu missed that sentence completely.
And what kind of repercussions could that have?
Well, the first repercussion is already happening, and it is to the detriment of the South African economy. Let me give you a practical example that I witnessed myself. A smallish company, I would say in the small to medium size, with about 100 people employed, just closed their doors between where I'm living and the next town, which is Klerksdorp or Matlusana. They had an exclusive export uh, permit for copper-related material to the US. Now, under tariffs, most minerals, including copper, is of course tariff-free. But the moment you add value to copper, you lose that tariff-free import and you pay a 30% tariff. Suddenly the Americans said to him, listen, with 30% added to your current cost, you're not competitive anymore, and we are stopping all our imports. So a week or so ago, at the end of the month, he laid off 80 of his 100 people. He's keeping a very small group of people employed just to keep the company basically running at very low levels, but he's on his way closing down. That's the one implication. So if that is the implication, and he has requested Park Stow's Department of Trade and Industry for assistance, and they haven't even answered his calls. So the president's announcement that we will give some support to those sectors, especially the vehicle manufacturing sector and the agricultural sector, very, very little is forthcoming. What the ANC is saying, and what Fikile Mbalula also said in his press conference today, is we'll have to expand and explore new markets. Now, that's something that takes a year to 2 years. It is something that is a government-to-government business. And if South Africa has 27 vacancies in its embassies globally for trade relations, how on earth are you going to manage government-to-government business if you don't have educated and trained uh, people in your embassies, typically your economic attaché or trade attaché or something like that? If you don't have that, you can't do it. So I think it's empty words, the government support. And then, of course, once you've lost the market, um, I don't think these tariffs will stay forever. But once you've lost that market and that vacuum is filled by something else, then you've lost that market. This is on our side. On the American side, of course, what they are doing, they're creating a vacuum. And that the vacuum will also be filled. That's typically what vacuums do. They attract attention. So they can attract Russian attention, they can attract Chinese attention, which they're already doing. So what the Americans are doing, and Trump was warned about this. He was warned by his own people and by his own advisors. Don't create a vacuum. Don't create a situation where you lose the economic impact and the soft power that you've got against somebody like South Africa, because somebody else is going to take it up. But Donald Trump is in a mood to exploit hard power, and he's not in a mood to deal with soft power. It seems to be not part of his personality.
So let's deal with the GNU and some of the statements that he made about the DA. That was also hard.
You know, if you take that press statement and you just analyze the ideological words and their ideological meaning, it's a study on its own. But I think the first word he used when he explained the DA was shenanigans. In other words, they're busy with all kinds of nonsense. That's according to him now. But then he went into it much deeper when he started using about right-wing forces and capitalist forces and colonial forces and these kind of things. When he does that, of course, he's speaking to his own audience, and he's speaking to another audience which wouldn't hear these kind of things. If you sit in the US or anywhere else, when you hear these things, I think you're scratching your head. What's he talking about? But basically what he's saying is that the government of national unity was the ANC's choice. And they did that.
Tactical choice, he called it.
No, that's another ideological term. Tactical, you see, when you understand Marxism and Leninism, you will see that they refer very often to something called a tactical retreat. Another word they use in those ideological scripts are the phrase a useful idiot and these kind of things. So a tactical retreat is when you move backwards so as to get an advantage at a later stage. So it's not like you're losing, you're just replacing the attack or the angle of attack from a different thing. And this is the language he's using. Well, I think there's a surprise for him in terms of just a technical maneuver, because he has to say that to deal with his own constituency, saying, guys, we had a bad performance last year in the election, but this was a once-off case. We're going to change that. And that is what most of the surveys that he referred to is not showing. It is showing that the backward trend, or the trend of the ANC going backwards, losing support, is continuous.
So interesting, you talk about them losing support. He was mentioning that they have 1.5 million members and it's been going up. Well, he couldn't quite read the number, but then he came up with the almost, 1.5 million. So he's saying they're not losing support. And then there is this issue of the South African Communist Party, which wants to fight the next election on its own. And they seem to be unhappy about that. They want to keep them in, but they almost said that they might have to choose.
Well, firstly, he struggled with the numbers. And then he realized he's going into exactly the same trap as Jacob Zuma did many, many years ago. So he rounded it off. So for his speechwriters, the following lesson: don't give big numbers to Fikile Mbalula. He's going to struggle with it in public. Give it short numbers. So he rounded it off to 1.5 million. It sounds to me like a paper tiger. If you look at ANC support, if you follow the national conferences, it used to be 1.5 million, then it came down to 1.2, and then it came down to 800,000, and then it even went as low as 600,000 members in good standing. Now suddenly it's up to 1.5 million. Well, I just don't believe it. Full stop. In terms of the current numbers, I think that may be the number of people on their membership list. But whether they paid up or whether they're active members, I doubt very, very seriously. And the same applies to the SACP that was part of this discussion. SACP numbers, of course, is a big secret. We just don't know. I've seen figures of roughly about 40,000 members, subscribed members to the SACP, and I've seen numbers as high as 60,000. Well, in a recent by-election in Seshego, the town north of Polokwane, where Julius Malema comes from, there was a by-election, and the SACP stood in a ward, and they gathered a total of 70 votes. Less than 1% of that whole ward. So the SACP as a party is a non-starter. They just don't have the numbers, because in their own words, they're a vanguard party. What does that mean? That means you sit like a flea on the back of a dog. So you on the ride, and the dog is taking you places, but you determine where the dog is going. That's the role of the SACP in the ANC. They have filled all the decision-making positions. They have very strong intellectual hold onto the ANC. They even have 3 ministers in cabinet. They've got Gwede Mantashe, they've got a deputy minister, Masondu, and they've got Bladen Zimandi. Now, the question is, how on earth do you deal with this, where a political party, as part of a alliance, is now saying, but we are going to do things on our own, but please keep us in your cabinet, and don't Don't discriminate against us because we are your friend ideologically. I think there's a big ideological battle still coming. Personally, my view is this is an idle threat by the SACP, and in the final instance, they wouldn't do it because they can't afford it, and the ANC can't afford losing more votes. So I think this is a battle that will go on, and there's a lesson that I've learned in a lot of debates and discussions with the ANC over years, and that is whenever you're confronted by a situation like this, don't try and resolve it at first. What you do as a step number one, you deepen the crisis. That's step number one, deepen the crisis. So what you do, you tell the SACP, okay guys, you're on your own, you can go. And then let's see how you're doing. And then when that crisis deepens, then it's time for a solution of some kind. So I think we're in the early stages of a deepening of a crisis situation, which by November next year will be resolved in a way that typically happens in the ANC alliance. So I don't see that as a real threat.
So the Government of National Unity and the Democratic Alliance, where do you think they stand after this? Because it was harsh words, and I understand that you say it was actually meant for his constituency, but I can't imagine Helen Zille really liking what he said.
Yeah, if you listen to the president 2 days ago and Fikile now, on a question, he clarified the issue. He said, we are talking about the Government of National Unity to the members in the Government of National Unity first, because that's our responsibility, and that is the memorandum of understanding that we all signed, and so on. So we will talk to those parties first. Once we have spoken to them, we will expand if we get an agreement. But now I must take you back to something which the president said and Fikile said, and that is, it is as if the ANC, as the 40% member of the Government of National Unity, has taken up the political leadership of this Government of National Unity in all aspects. And then this word that you mentioned earlier on comes in. It's a tactical maneuver. In other words, for now, we're sharing power, but we are not going to give off any of the influence that we have or any of the things that we're doing when it gets to issues such as transformation, foreign affairs, the economy, and so on and so on and so on. Well, on one of those issues, they had to budge in during the budget, because the DA also, I think at that point, showed that their real political power is not in the executive. They've got too little traction in the executive, but the real power sits in parliament. The real power sits in committees and in voting. So let's see where the ANC gets with this kind of situation. But I think the same applies to the Government of National Unity as what applied to the SACP. Let's deepen the crisis. Let's see where it goes. Now, the DA is adamant that they're not leaving the Government of National Unity. They will ride out every crisis that the ANC throws to them. The ANC, on their side, is adamant that they're not going to kick out the DA. So, in this marriage of convenience, I do not see a divorce in the near future.
So do you think so? They have to speak to the DA first before they invite other parties in. So the DA is probably not going to say yes, bring in Action SA.
Yeah, they'll have to talk to the DA and the other 8. That includes the Freedom Front, Maimane, and so on and so on. And I think the only party that qualifies in terms of current power relations would be Action SA. And Action SA is a very strange animal. Then they're in, then they're out. If you listen to them currently, they're not interested in being in government. But sometimes they would like to be in government. So it's a very difficult one. And it may also be that in a proposed cabinet change, for a cabinet reshuffle, which kind of took place when he appointed a new police minister and put Senzo Nchunu on leave, and of course fired Andrew Whitfield, which if you listen to the president and to Fikile, it's clear that was done to gain political points in the alliance. So poor Deputy Minister Whitfield is kind of a victim of a big political game here. But there will have to be an appointment in his position. Similane, I think our Minister of Housing, we call it Human Settlements, is on very thin ice. And there are one or two other ministers that maybe change that's not doing something. Even if you think about that, a cabinet reshuffle is not a too distant idea, and it may be that he will bring in some members from existing players in the government of national unity, more of them, into cabinet, not necessarily the DA.
It's like what? Usimamami?
Yeah, Musi Maimane is one that comes to mind. There's another one or two people from the Freedom Front that he can look at. The IFP is always a very, very loyal partner to. And we must never forget in this whole deal, people tend to forget that the government of national unity was formed 2 to 3 weeks after the election. But a week before that, a government of provincial unity was formed in KZN, where the ANC lost power in absolute terms. That they the third biggest party now, the DA even bigger than them. And that relationship is holding. So it might be that it is the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government that keeps the government of national unity at national level in position, that if they touch this one at national level and the DA is pulling out of KZN, then the KZN government collapses and MK in all probability takes over. And that's too ghastly to contemplate in the current relationship. So one must never forget the position that that KwaZulu-Natal plays, even though it's a provincial government, but that is a key to the stability of the government of national unity.
So there's a lot of bluster, but you expect the government of national unity to hold for a while still?
Yeah, to hold for a while, and I hope that that part of what you said would also include that they resolve the issue between National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank came out very strongly saying, guys, currently we're going to stick to a 3% inflation target. And National Treasury immediately said, no, that is a policy decision that will only be taken at National Treasury. Now, that hasn't been resolved, but it seems to me that government is aiming at a little higher benchmark, maybe 4.5%. But Kganyago is a very, very conservative fiscal manager, and I can see that is another battle that is raging. And we've been warned by people like Standard & Poor's saying, guys, forget about the stability of the government of national unity. Sort out your financial and fiscal policy, because that is putting you in more trouble than the political instability.
Well, even Mbalula acknowledged that opinion polls want the GNU.
He said that, and that's why if you want to give this press conference a heading or a title, it would be the politics of paradox. Because on the one hand, he's criticizing and he's challenging, but on the other hand, he's saying, you know what, we don't have a choice. This is what the people want.
Professor Theo Venter, thanks so much.
Dis 'n plesier.